Okay, let's just jump right in. This is an incredible story.
Yeah.
It's not just, a history lesson.
No.
It's a journey that started with a massive gamble and ended up proving the actual shape of our world.
Right.
We're talking about the mission that pulled off the first circumnavigation of the Earth, and it was all masterminded by Ferdinand Magellan.
And if you really want to get why they even tried such a suicidal journey, you have to look at what they were after.
Yeah.
The goal was pretty simple on paper. Find a westward route to the Spice Islands. This wasn't just for glory. It was a high-stakes economic mission.
And it's funny, we hear spices today, just think about what's in the kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
But in the 16th century, things like cloves, nutmeg, cinnamon, they were worth absolute fortunes.
Oh, absolutely. We are talking about goods that were sometimes traded literally pound for pound with gold.
Wow.
A single pound of cloves could be worth more than a regular person's wages for an entire year. And more than that, they were crucial for preserving meat through the winter.
So whoever controlled the spices controlled massive wealth.
Right. Exactly. And at the time, Portugal had a lock on the eastern routes around Africa.
Which brings us to why Magellan, a Portuguese captain, ended up sailing for Spain.
Right. Portugal and Spain had signed this really important document, the Treaty of Tordesillas. It basically split the undiscovered world between them.
So Portugal got the east.
Portugal got the east, which meant they had the monopoly on sailing around Africa to Asia. Magellan figured if he could find a way west through or around the Americas, Spain could get to the Spice Islands without breaking that treaty.
So Magellan, who's this Portuguese nobleman,
Yeah.
he pitches this radical idea to his own king first, gets shot down, and then just switches teams.
He really does. He goes to Spain and pitches King Charles I on this global shortcut. It was an incredible pitch.
I'll say.
He convinced the king this was Spain's big chance, so he gets the funding for 5 ships and puts together a crew of about 270 men, a real international group, actually.
And just preparing for that must have been a nightmare. Stocking food and water for a trip where you have no idea how long it'll take.
And after all that, they finally set sail. September 20, 1519. 5 ships, 270 people, and a 3-year ordeal they could never have seen coming.
The first part was just crossing the Atlantic, heading toward modern-day Brazil.
And that was brutal right from the start. Bad weather, cramped ships, food supplies already getting low. It was an immediate test for everyone.
And once they hit South America, the real frustration started. They weren't there to explore the coast.
No, they were looking for a way through it.
A shortcut. So they spent weeks, then months, just crawling down the coastline, checking every single bay, every river mouth.
Looking for a passage that might not even exist. And this was agonizing. Morale just plummeted, especially when the southern winter started closing in.
The days get shorter, it gets colder, and the crews start to think they're trapped, that this landmass just goes on forever.
Magellan had to be incredibly strict just to stop a mutiny.
So they had to stop. They find a bay and just wait for winter to pass. You can just imagine the tension on those ships.
It speaks to his iron will. He had this absolute belief the passage existed, and he somehow projected that certainty onto his crew, even when all the evidence said otherwise.
You had to be ruthless.
Totally. But that focus is what kept the whole thing from falling apart right there.
And it finally paid off. After months of searching, they find it. A narrow, winding waterway at the very tip of the continent.
That's the Strait of Magellan. But what people forget is how terrifying it was to navigate.
Right, not a calm river.
No, this was a channel with these towering cliffs, crazy winds, and really, really rough water.
It sounds like a death trap. And it was so bad that one of the 5 ships, the San Antonio, just gave up.
Yep. Turned around and sailed back to Spain. So Magellan lost a ship, supplies, and a chunk of his crew right there.
The other 3 ships just pushed on.
For weeks through these cold, foggy channels, and they saw these fires burning on the shore to the south, probably from the local people.
Which is why they named it Tierra del Fuego.
The land of fire, exactly.
And then, after all that, they emerged. They finally sail out into this huge, open ocean on the other side. And the water, it was just incredibly calm.
So Magellan, probably just so relieved after the nightmare of the street, he names it the Pacific Ocean. The peaceful sea.
Which is just the biggest piece of irony in this whole story, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. Because that peace lasted for maybe a day.
And this is where the real agony starts. Magellan, using the best maps he had, made a huge, and I mean dangerous, miscalculation. He thought the Pacific crossing would take a few weeks.
Instead, it was almost 4 months, 100 days on open water. The suffering they went through is, I mean, it's one of the most extreme stories of human endurance ever.
The hunger was just relentless. They ran out of everything.
And the food that was left didn't just go bad, it turned to like dust full of rats.
They started eating sawdust, scraped from the ship's planks.
And the leather hides, the ones that protected the rigging, they had to soak them in the ocean for days just to soften them, then boil them over and over so they could even try to chew them.
And on top of the hunger, there was the disease, scurvy.
So many men got desperately sick. With no fresh fruit or vegetables, their bodies just started to fail, gums bleeding, teeth falling out.
Their drinking water they had turned thick and yellow, just putrid.
Men were dying almost every day. They just throw them overboard into this massive, silent ocean.
And what's wild is they were sailing into a void that their maps said shouldn't be there. The world was supposed to be smaller.
Exactly. This wasn't just a miscalculation. It was proving that the entire geographical model of the world was wrong. They were sailing into an ocean their best scientists insisted didn't exist.
Which must have just added to the terror. But then they finally saw land. March 1521, the Philippines.
Salvation. The local people came out and brought them fresh food, water. For the survivors, this was their chance to recover.
But this moment of triumph turns into tragedy so fast. Magellan, instead of just resupplying and leaving, makes a series of, well, fatal mistakes.
He gets too involved in local politics, starts trying to convert people to his religion.
He promises to help one local leader defeat a rival chief, a guy named Lapu-Lapu on the island of Mactan.
This was just peak overconfidence. He takes a small group of his soldiers to Mactan, assuming their European weapons would make it an easy fight.
But the land was all wrong for them.
The water was too shallow, the big ships with the cannons couldn't get close enough to help, so Magellan and his men were just exposed on the beach.
And the local warriors knew their territory. Magellan gets hit by a poisoned arrow and then he's surrounded. He dies right there in the shallow water.
And just like that, they lose their leader. The whole expedition is suddenly rudderless and dangerously low on men.
So low they realized they couldn't even sail the 3 ships they had left.
So they had to make a heartbreaking choice. Burn one of the ships and put everyone and everything on the last 2.
And eventually a new captain emerges, Juan Sebastian Elcano. He takes command of the last ship that can make it home, the Victoria.
And Elcano has one job,
Yeah.
finish the mission.
And he does.
Yeah.
They finally reach the Spice Islands. They load the Victoria with tons and tons of precious clothes.
The main goal is achieved. But now they have to get that cargo back to Spain. And they know the Portuguese control all the normal routes home.
So Elcano makes this desperate gamble. He decides to sail west across the Indian Ocean, but staying way, way off the known trade routes to avoid getting captured.
Which means more isolation, more hunger, more disease. And the Victoria's falling apart. They had to pump water out of the leaking hull every single day just to stay afloat.
What a final sprint. And then, in September 1522, 3 years after they left, the Victoria limps back into a Spanish port.
And the numbers are just staggering. Of the 270 men who set out,
Only 18 came back. Just 18 exhausted survivors.
but financially it was a huge success. The spices on that one little ship paid for the entire 5-ship expedition and then some.
But the real legacy is so much bigger than that.
Right.
This was the first physical proof that the Earth is a sphere.
Before this, you could argue it, you could theorize. This journey showed it, and it showed that all the world's oceans are connected.
It must have thrown map makers into total chaos.
Oh, they had to redraw everything, especially the Pacific Ocean, which turned out to be unbelievably huge.
And then there's maybe the weirdest discovery of all, the calendar.
Yeah, this is fascinating. When they got back to Spain, they realized their ship's log was 1 day behind the date in Europe.
They were off by a whole day.
They proved that if you travel continuously west, you essentially gain time. You chase the sunset around the world.
And that calendar problem is what eventually led scientists to create the international dateline.
Exactly. So even though Magellan himself died, his vision is what made it all possible. The journey just fundamentally changed everything. Trade, maps, our whole concept of the planet.
When you look at the big picture, what Elcano and those last 17 men did, they didn't just complete a voyage. They kind of completed humanity's understanding of its own home.
It taught us that the world was bigger and way more connected than anyone could have ever imagined.
Good luck with your studies. See you next time.